Good morning, everybody. Shalom to Israel, and welcome to all of you. First of all, I'd like to say how much respect I have towards the World Jewish Congress for its activities worldwide. You are a very distinguished group of Jewish leaders. I want to especially acknowledge my good friend, Mr. Ronald Lauder, and wish success to Mr. Kaplan, for Mr. Zinger, for leading the organization. And I hope you're having successful deliberations with the Israeli leadership. It's not always easy. First of all, we are at the morning after the municipal elections. They fascinate many of us. However, we've seen some disturbing phenomena. Number one, there was a low turnout rate of Israeli citizens going to vote for who will lead their daily life in the municipal realm. And I must say that it was quite disappointing. And I think it comes out from a certain feeling which is based on two notions. One is as if the municipal government in Israel is corrupt, which is absolutely not true. There are very good mayors and very good city councillors. Some of them do it in a voluntary capacity, who are taking the lead on a daily life. And there was a portrayed image that everything is corrupt. Secondly, there is a problem with certain quarters of the Israeli democracy whereby we've gotten used to the fact that there is no democracy. There are much less parties with inner democracy. My party, Labour, is now holding a leadership contest for the leadership of the party on 21st November. I'm challenging the current leader, Shali Yachimowicz. We are one of the only parties in the country who has internal democracy. So there's kind of a feeling, together with a wave of legislation against democratic processes, that gives a certain feeling that who needs it anyhow? Something is decided up there on top. And people, instead of taking care of their daily life, did not go and take the responsibility for 5 minutes during the election day to go and vote. And this is disturbing. The mayors who are elected, many of the mayors who are elected are superb mayors. And you know them, you've been there, you've adopted projects around Israel, you know the Israeli political scene and the Israeli social scene, and you know for sure that there are some very good local leaders in Israel. And a part of the dilemma that we have is to define the exact boundaries between the government and local government. In Israel, there is a mix. It is unclear. There are issues which depend solely on the central government, where the citizen thinks it's the local government, and vice versa. And take, for example, even the traffic and the train, local train, light train in Jerusalem. It's a mixture of issues, or even early age education. And I can attest to that fact. It's a hybrid between various ministries and local government, and you know it all too well. So that's part of the issue, that the citizen doesn't know who is accountable. And because he doesn't know who is accountable, there is an issue of interest in local government. But all in all, I hope that the system will stabilize itself and move on. A few topics on the agenda. First of all, I chair the Labour Party faction in the Knesset. This means that we coordinate, or try to coordinate, the activities of the opposition parties in the Knesset. The opposition is not homogeneous. The opposition comprises basically of the Israeli story. The opposition includes center-left parties, includes Arab parties, and includes Haredi ultra-Orthodox parties. So the agendas are crisscrossed naturally, and they don't always fit. However, I would say that we've started a session, this Knesset session, with certain advantages to the opposition, and I think that, in fact, the municipal elections will speed up. For example, I identify a weakening of Likud in local government, and I identify weakening of Likud in central government as well, and I identify a constant erosion within the leading party in Israel, in their behavioral mode within Knesset and government. Secondly, the major issues of the day, which you've heard about yesterday as well, are touching upon our daily lives. I will touch immediately about the peace process and the Iranian issue, but let's talk first about the political and legislative processes in the Knesset, which can create a point of friction. Number one, there is a legislation which is instigated by Victor Lieberman to increase the threshold and change some of the rules of the game in voting patterns in Israel. That causes many problems. Look, you can say, we don't like the Israeli political system, it's too many parties and it's unstable. Following what we've seen in the shutdown in the United States, I don't know what is a stable political system. In general, political systems around the world and governments are suffering from constant undermining. I've been a cabinet minister in 5 different cabinet posts. It is clear that the tension between government and civil service and over-legalization of systems and so forth and so on creates a certain hampering of the capabilities of government to govern on the one hand, and on the other hand, the fatigueness from the political system leads to a weakening of political systems around the world. So whilst in the past I would hear from all my American friends, you have a terrible system, believe me, there ain't nothing that we've seen in the shutdown. Here we know how to talk to each other in the back rooms of the floor, we know how to negotiate, we know how to compromise, and at least take responsibility in the right moments. And I must add, at the end of it all, if you look at it, with all the problems of the Israeli political system, governments here managed to get through. They managed to pass budgets, to declare war, to make peace, to pull out of Gaza. It is possible with all the problems that it entails. So the fact that Lieberman has sent this poison pill into the system creates many problems. It hampers and limits capabilities of parties to express themselves, and more importantly, and I'm bothered about it, I think he's making a mistake in even creating a certain possible unification of Arab parties in the Knesset, whilst all these parties differ on many, many important issues. The next issue is the idea of a referendum. A referendum as such is not a bad idea. A referendum is possible when we will bring the big agreement, the big deal to the Israeli public. I do believe that right now there is an unequivocal majority in the Knesset for a peace deal with the Palestinians. It's quite rare indeed. And nonetheless, it's feasible. However, that the fact that this idea of a referendum is kind of brought in as part of a political combination, as part of I would say, Tammany Hall tricks, is very problematic, because touching upon the issue of referendum is something that we're not accustomed to in Israel. It can lead to certain racial undertones in the debate, like it was during the direct election for premiership during the 90s. And at the end, we should strengthen our parliamentary system as much as possible. And the third issue that's brought to bear, and which will be I would say, an explosive item, is the whole idea of sharing the burden, serving in the army. You've heard a lot about it. It's a major topic. It has to do with social processes that have undergone in certain groups in Israel, mostly the Haredis. The Haredis, as was seen last night in the elections, too, are not an homogeneous group. There's not one person who decides for them. There's a changing of the guard in the rabbinic world. There's a major change in the inclusion in the workforce. And we have to look upon all of this in a very careful bird's eye view, not to make mistakes and not to draw certain social processes backwards because of rhetoric or confrontational behavior. And now, I shift to the social economic issues. I served as Minister of Welfare and Social Services for over 4 years, and I've had the pleasure of cooperating with many enterprises which we're affiliated with. The Israeli social scene is first and foremost bothering in terms of the social gap and poverty rate. We have 20% poverty rate. That means 1/5 of the Israeli population is poor. What does it mean, poor? It means below the poverty line, which is about, let's say, $700 a month per person, earning less than $700 a month per person. Now, to say that it's only Arabs and Haredi is a huge mistake. It's not true. It's true that there is more poverty in those groups, in the Arab community, because you need to break glass ceilings and include more and more Arabs in the workforce, predominantly women. And in the Haredi world, because of the learning culture of the Haredi world that we've spoken of, which compels us to move towards inclusion of many more Haredi men in the workforce. But it's not the only thing. Under the poverty line, there are many Israelis who work and cannot earn sufficiently. And the social protest of 2 years ago, which was a unique phenomenon in my mind in modern history, because it included 5% of the total population of a nation in one city square, in one night, demanding something which is called social justice, an amorphic term where each one has found itself affiliated with the idea because of its own, her or his feelings toward the idea of social justice, with no violence. But all in all, it means that there is a demand for a certain redistribution of the wealth in Israeli society. I would say, in simplistic words, that 100 years after the Bolshevik Revolution, here there was a demand for a fairer share of wealth in a democratic way, in taxation, in incentives, in salary, in income sharing, which is something very important and has not faded away. It has taken different structural and political interpretations, but it is still very apparent. And part of it has to do with poverty, and part of it has to do with the middle class, and part of it has to do with young Israelis who are parallel to their age group around the world, are looking for a better life and a better income, and they are seeing that whilst their parents were quite better well off as young couples in the past in terms of what they would get from the state, today they are in a different situation altogether. And that is a major challenge, and I say that the poverty issue is a major threat to the innermost fabric of a society, which may find itself amidst challenges of the most difficult nature in war in this region. And therefore, it entails us and compels us to think about it constantly. I've written about it, I've discussed it, we can talk about it in the Q&A part as well. And finally, the peace process. Prime Minister Netanyahu is to meet with John Kerry today for well over 5 hours in Italy. This is extremely important. I believe sincerely that there is a golden opportunity now to break through towards an agreement with the Palestinians. What does it mean? It means, first and foremost, in my mind, that there is a partner on the other side. I've met Abbas 2 weeks ago. I agree, I don't know how far he is willing to go, but he is a partner to negotiate with. And I congratulate the government for holding the negotiations and trying to get a deal. However, there will be a given moment, a historical moment, whereby the two leaders will have to meet under the auspices of the American leadership and look each other in the eye and decide whether they move on for a deal. And the deal may be, in my mind, an interim deal. I don't think it's feasible to have a full-fledged deal, but at least give it a try. And amidst the tumultuous circumstances of the region, Dafka, I say, I insist that because of the Arab Spring, because of the innate change in the Arab world, which is fascinating in and of itself and has historical consequences, now is the time that the two parties, where all the others are dealing with their own problems, now is the time for the two parties to get to a deal. It's difficult, it's painful, but it's essential for the future and well-being of Israel. And therefore, we should do whatever we can towards that purpose. I don't know whether Netanyahu will go all the way and how far he is serious. Sometimes he goes backwards toward his basic opinions and rhetoric, which is more deep into the idea that there is nowhere to progress or advance. And sometimes, in deeds and words, he says that he is serious about moving towards peace. So let's give it a try. And I said that if Netanyahu moves towards peace, we shall help him. We shall have to help him carry this burden and move towards a deal with the Palestinians. But it depends on how far he is willing to go, and none of us know. None of us knows how deep the discussions are. There were about 15 rounds of talks so far, and the Livni team and the Arikat team, and we hope that there will be progress. Now, Netanyahu, in his words yesterday in Italy, linked it somehow also to the Iranian situation. In that situation, in this challenge, there is no coalition and opposition. The opposition and the coalition, we are united against this challenge. We realize and understand the grave danger of an Iranian nuclear capability. We understand that. We are united in saying that all options are on the table. However, I think that at this given moment, we should support the efforts of the United States and the P5+1 to get to a deal with the Iranians, provided the deal is strong, well-maintained, and sanctions can be lifted only when there is an agreement that comes with deeds that prove that there is a change. Now I say the following. I think that Netanyahu's basic presentation in the UN was good, and I think it was convincing. However, I think that part of his rhetoric is not sophisticated enough. I think part of his rhetoric should combine something that holds a carrot and a stick and says, look, if there is a change, I will welcome it, and says, perhaps there is a change. We do not really know what's happening in the quarters of the Iranian leadership out there. We will test it according to actions. And say we support the efforts of the P5+1 to get to a deal. And let's hope and see. Otherwise, we should be there with the world to see if it, God forbid, fails. If it fails, there will be justification for other alternatives. But if it succeeds, of course, it's a much better alternative to get to the deal in peaceful means. And finally, Syria. Syria is a very complex situation. I've been discussing with Syrian opposition leaders for the past 2 years all over the world. I've met many and I've spoken to many. I think there was a huge opportunity missed by the United States in the last 2 years. I think had the United States and its allies operated early on, like in Libya, the situation would have been different. In the last 2 years, it's changed because of the entry of jihadist forces into Syria and the lack of support at the initial stages to the Syrian opposition. I think that there is a moral call of duty, that Assad is an atrocious leader who butchers his people, and the world should stand firm. And I hope that once the chemical weapons are taken out and the Geneva process starts, there will be a process of change that will lead to democracy in Syria. Syria is a multicultural society, mostly secular, and it can have a future of peaceful relations with Israel if it's led towards the right direction. So I stop here and I open the floor for comments and questions on any topic you deem fit. Thank you very, very much.